Stream for Thursday, May 5th, 2022. Hey, I'm Aaron Schatz, Editor-in-Chief of FootballOutsiders.com, joined today by Mike Tanier as well as Scott Spratt. We are going to go through some of the latest news in the NFL, post-draft news, now that we're in the post-draft lull. But we're also going to talk some fantasy football because we got Scott here, and Scott's done all of the preliminary Kubiak projections before he heads off on his honeymoon. Scott is getting married this weekend.
Yep, little over 2 days from now.
Congratulate Scott.
Thank you. Very excited.
It's a very big day, and then he gets 2 weeks off, which is very exciting.
2 whole weeks. That's the entire severance package. You get 2 weeks off, but you have to do a podcast right before you get fitted for your tuxedo. Congratulations.
It's a little crazy how in football these days, it's like you have to kind of work to find a 2-week gap to find time between all the crazy stuff that happens all year long. It's a mess, but I think we're going to squeeze it in.
Yeah, I think right after the draft is a good time to go. I go on vacation in February, but like after free agency, like you can do August, I guess, early August, late July, but the camps are open then. So
4th of July weekend is pretty much it, as long as you're not on the player gets arrested beat.
Player breaks off half his hand.
Yes, or and of course this week was also the owner caught in the blue light district week, but I don't think we're covering that particular story today.
Yeah. It's dangerous stuff. I'll mention Ben Robinson wants to know where the hat is. Ben, that was a one-time bet loss with Mike Tanier. I was a little bit too optimistic about the 3-0 Panthers last year. Lost a bet, had to wear the hat, but I'm embracing baldness more generally speaking.
I'll pass you one over. I'll try to get this one over to you.
I don't think that is how the internet works.
I try. It's because it's a Rutgers hat. If it was a Temple hat, it would go straight to Carolina.
I was going to say the Rutgers hat comes to me in New England because we have all the Rutgers players.
We're really more Temple and Baylor country down here in Charlotte.
So Scott wrote an article this week. We went through all of the projections. We did initial projections on the rookies, talking about which rookies were going to be most valuable for fantasy football. Mike on the draft show Tuesday, on the last draft show, did who's going to win rookie of the year. But this is the more important question of who's going to actually help you win in fantasy football.
Yeah, I mean, equally important questions now that you can go to your local sports book and put some money down on either option. But yeah,
I suppose that's true. But these are the guys who we think are going to really be valuable in fantasy football drafts. And you went through like a dozen players plus the quarterbacks. Our graphic here has the top 5. So let's talk a little bit about our top 5 rookies for next year, starting with our favorite running back of the year, Breece Hall.
Yeah, I mean, Hall was honestly pretty close to a perfect prospect coming into this thing. First, he was the first running back taken in the draft. He was taken in the 2nd round early, kind of in the range where a lot of the best running backs go these days. Jonathan Taylor being a great recent example. And Hall just looks so similar to Taylor in general. Both are 5'11", both between 217 and 219 pounds. Both ran 4.39 40s. And Hall finished, I think, 4th all-time in our backcast projections, which go back away. Taylor was like an all-time outlier top guy. But I'll say, too, with Hall, he actually caught the ball pretty regularly in college, 10.3% receiving ratio. That was a bit of a red flag with Taylor, which ended up not mattering at all. But just from a preseason kind of feels perspective, you feel really good about Hall from all of his characteristics as a player. The question was really just where was he going to land in fantasy? And I would say the Jets are a good but not necessarily great option because, North Carolina alum like myself, Michael Carter, is with the team. And while he's a bit undersized at 5'8", 201, he was really good last year. 0.24 broken tackles per touch, according to SIS. That was the top among running backs with 150 or more touches. So I'm guessing that Hall is going to end up being the lead back, but this could be a bit of a timeshare, kind of like Carter was in back at North Carolina with Javonte Williams being the lead back. So like in the end, Hall gets projected for 211 carries, 41 targets this season. Really good numbers, but kind of a back-end RB2 more than the like, oh my gosh, this guy's going to get all the touches, Najee Harris style.
And he also, in broken tackle and missed tackle percentage in college, him and Kenneth Walker finished 1-2. I forget who was first, but it was like within like a 1/10 of a percentage point. So he's a guy who's going to come in with a lot of capability to break tackles and make guys miss, as Carter had when he came up.
I think the Jets do not have a great offensive line to get blocking for him, but it's certainly better than the offensive line that Najee Harris had last year.
Well, yeah.
Oh man, yeah. I mean, that's a pretty low bar to clear, but you're absolutely right. The whole like left tackle sort of situation is kind of a mystery, but even George Fant played pretty well last year, and if he ends up being kind of the short-term future there, I'd say their line is average. I'm mostly worried about the quarterback play, and quarterbacks have a lot more to do with running back fantasy production than you might suspect, creating opportunities, especially opportunities near the end zone where running backs can often score. So it would be really good for him and for other guys we'll talk about like Garrett Wilson if Zack Wilson could have a really big sophomore breakout.
Yeah, I'm not counting on it. I've got to say, I'm a lot more sanguine about the idea of a Trevor Lawrence breakout than I am a Zack Wilson breakout.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed. And we see Treylon Burks there at number 2. And my first concern is, I guess he's going to be the wide receiver 1. Now, of course, in fantasy, that means, he's going to be the wide receiver 1, but what kind of wide receiver 1 is he going to be?
Yeah, this is interesting. To me, it's really easy to connect the dots of the Titans had A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown was top 3 with a 6.1 average yards after the catch in his career in the NFL. So, like, really dangerous guy once he got the balls in his hands. And with Burks, he was the number 1 D1 player in yards after the catch last season. So you're like, I kind of see where the Titans were doing.
Right.
Now, that isn't still the perfect fantasy equation. They're obviously a run-first team, especially if Derrick Henry can stay healthy this full season. They did add Robert Woods, another player that I think could potentially be the number 1 wide receiver. So in my mind, there's a bit of a debate here between Burks and Drake London, who also got drafted much more highly. But I'll point out, too, that Burks was actually the number 1 wide receiver in playmaker score. And there's a bit of a disconnect here, I think, between public perception and the way that metric evaluates prospects, where his 1,100 receiving yards at Arkansas is like way more impressive than the similar yardage Drake London had at USC, because Arkansas hardly ever threw the ball, just 294 pass attempts last season. So he totally dominated their wide receiver room and receiving work. And I think that's a really good sign of his ability to make a quick impact in the NFL.
I have to apologize. When I sent the list to Ross to make the graphic, I somehow skipped Drake London. London should be number 3.
London is 3, but this is good. I think there's kind of a big 6 in the rookie class, so this is probably the best way to talk about it.
I apologize I apologize to all Atlanta fans and to Drake London himself for leaving him off this list. I completely screwed up, because if you think about who has the possibility of really being wide receiver 1 on their team, I think the most likely would be Burks and Drake London, unless you think of Kyle Pitts as wide receiver 1, depending on how you think of Kyle Pitts.
That's the thing. Like, among the wide receivers on the Falcons, there's just absolutely no doubt that London is the number 1 guy, because their number 2 then is Olamide Zaccheaus, an Aaron favorite. Their wide receiver depth chart is pretty barren at this point. But Pitts is going to see the most targets, I think we can say pretty definitively. And while we think of the Falcons as being this like air it out type of offense with tons of pass attempts, they play in a dome, it's all great. The quarterback change could have a lot more to do with this than you might suspect, where Ryan threw, I think, 560 pass attempts last season. We're projecting for the second fewest pass attempts for the Falcons this year with Marcus Mariota, who's a bit of a runner. And with a rookie Desmond Ridder, who, if he starts, is actually a bit of a runner too. So there could be some changes in the offense, and it may not be quite as gunslinger as it once was, which, I mean, I think London's going to have a great rookie season, but it may not be tip top, obviously the number 1 wide receiver. I actually think he's the number 2 wide receiver this season among the rookies.
And by the way, both Burks and London are plus 750 to win Offensive Rookie of the Year. So they're tied for second behind Kenny Pickett. And of course, it's different. Rookie of the Year versus fantasy is very different when it comes to quarterback. So Burks, the house seems to believe with you, and Burks and London there. We're all in agreement there.
Especially because Pickett would not be much of a runner. So even if Pickett were a week 1 starter, not only do you feel like Pickett's going to have weak passing numbers, but he's not going to have the rushing numbers that Ridder or Malik Willis would have if they were starting. They have much more fantasy value than Pickett does.
Yeah, for sure. It's honestly, the tie-in there is potentially with team success, because you could imagine Pickett being a week 1 starter, not necessarily saying he will be. We'll get to that. But like, the Steelers could win 10 games and sneak in the playoffs, even if Pickett's a full season starter. Yeah. Great defense, great supporting talent. Maybe not a great offensive line, but whatever. They've got some encouraging signs. If any of these other rookie quarterbacks end up getting the full year of starts, it's hard to imagine them having a ton of success on some pretty depleted rosters. I would say Atlanta and probably my Panthers in particular.
Yeah, so the projections love the Steelers defense to rebound this year after being kind of average last year. But of course, they were so good the 2 years before that. And the best defense projection is a battle between the Steelers and the Saints, which brings us to Chris Olave on the offensive side of the ball for the Saints. Because, I mean, I really feel like the Saints are really underrated for this year if they can have an average offense. If their defense does what we think it'll do, that's a pretty good team. So how much does Olave contribute to them having an average offense?
I mean, I think it's fair to assume that the Saints are going to really throw a lot of passes to Olave this year. They traded up just a king's ransom of draft picks to get to him, thinking presumably that he was kind of the final piece of the puzzle. And I think there's some reasons to believe it and some not to. Like, one reason for pessimism is that Michael Thomas had just an otherworldly 31% target share back in 2018 and 19 when he was last healthy, second highest just behind DeAndre Hopkins. So like Olave is pretty definitively the number 2 if Thomas can stay healthy this year. Of course, Thomas has played 7 games the last 2 years because of various ankle injuries. So bit of a question mark from that perspective. But I would then say from a fantasy perspective, one reason I might be a little bit more pessimistic of him than I am of London and Burks is the relative lack of size. He's 6 foot and 187 pounds. And while he's super fast, sub 4.40 guy, can kind of stretch the field and score some long touchdowns, in general, the guys that are that small don't score a ton of touchdowns. He actually led this class with a 20% touchdown rate at Ohio State, but like college game is just a little bit different. And I'm actually projecting him for a lower projected peak touchdown rate in the NFL than London, even though London scored way less often in his college career. There's just a big difference about being a red zone target when you're 6'4" than when you're 6 feet and 187.
Yeah, I look at Olave like the Saints usually have Deveray Henderson. They used to have Robert Meacham. And then I think Kenny Stills was more of that guy. He's the vertical guy. And you could usually pencil in 6, 7, 8 touchdowns with Drew Brees at quarterback from that guy. But somebody else, Thomas before that, Colston, some of these other guys, they were the ones, the PPR league, the 100 reception guy. It was a different role in the offense.
Just remember, Jameis Winston was kind of good last year when he played. I mean, that Saints offense was bad because Simeon was bad, and then Taysom Hill was worse, and then Ian Book was horrendous.
Football Outsiders' favorite, Ian Book. Mike, this is an interesting question, I think, for you too, because of your Eagles proximity, where there does seem to be kind of like a new wave of receiving threat in the NFL, where some of the smaller guys have kind of gotten these earlier round picks, do a little bit more than your traditional small players. Devontae Smith being a prime example, but Smith didn't score a lot of touchdowns last year. Right. Do you think that's Jalen Hurtsy? Do you think that Smith is never going to score a lot of touchdowns? Like, how does that kind of work in the new NFL?
The Eagles were an outlier in a lot of that stuff. Like, the Eagles would get into the red zone and having run the ball all the way down the field would try to throw the ball. Hurts at the goal line was having a hard time finding people. Nick Sirianni called some wacky plays down there. There was this need to force feed Jalen Reagor the ball in those situations, which worked out.
That went well.
That need is gone.
Yeah. And Devontae is different because he was a smaller receiver who could do a variety of things. Was a good intermediate target, pretty good over the middle target. So it's hard to say with that. If I'm looking for a red zone target, I think I'm still looking for a bigger guy. I'm looking for Drake London in that role, and maybe a niftier guy like Garrett Wilson potentially, than the pure lift the lid speed guy, which I think is where Olave fits in.
CCX3 asks, what kind of guys does Jameis like? Has Jameis ever had a receiver as fast as Olave? Like, thinking back to Tampa, I mean, obviously his number one receiver was Mike Evans, who's a very different kind of guy.
Yeah, I don't remember the speedsters on those teams. So, I mean, the guy Jameis likes is kind of a free safety. I mean, let's come on. He was pretty good last year, and 25 interceptions. I'm not sure. A deep threat will obviously help though in that offense, because there was none. Derek talks about it on our podcast. There was no deep threat. There was no opportunity to push the ball downfield last year, and really the year before that as well.
I would say, I think Jameis does throw a pretty deep ball. And while he sort of famously threw so many balls up for grabs his last year in Tampa, I think so much of that was the Bruce Arians offense that loves to strike the ball down the field. I'm not sure that's really what the Saints are all about, but you do feel better about Jameis, I think, being a quarterback for a rookie with speed than you might say Zack Wilson, who I think has another player that would kind of be in this mix.
I'm sorry. Right. I'm still when you're 6 of this hypothetical Jameis that's out there when he's healthy and when he's in the right. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be skeptical, but like someday we're going to see this real Jameis that we keep hearing about.
I tell you, the fact is, if you, other than the 30 interception year, Jameis has always been slightly above average.
All right.
He had one horrendous, weird year. Other than that, he's always been slightly above average. I think that they can have an average offense.
All right. We'll probably be revisiting this often during the summer.
Garrett Wilson, the other Ohio State guy with the Jets. Mm-hmm. The interesting thing about Garrett Wilson is so what happens to Corey Davis now, right? Like everybody feels like, oh, Garrett Wilson comes in and he's, he's not Elijah Moore. So Elijah Moore still plays his role. He's not Braxton Berrios. So Braxton Berrios still plays his role. But what happens to Corey Davis?
It's just hilarious. Like, is it just me or the Jets have like too many good receiving options? They bring in CJ Uzomah too from the near champion Bengals, is a much better pass catching tight end option than they had all of last year. But I think these skill guys are really good. Elijah Moore had a negative receiving DVOA last year, but also had the 4th lowest catchable target percentage. Again, so much of this is about Zach Wilson and whether he can take a step forward. But I think Moore is like a very talented player. And I think Braxton Berrios, so his 5.8 average yards after the catch the last 2 years, that's tied for 6th best among wide receivers. It's tied with Cooper Kupp, aka the Triple Crown winner from last year. And I know that a lot of that is because of a lower average at the target, and he's more of a slot-only receiving option. But if the Jets wanted to, I think they could pretty seamlessly put him in the slot role that Jameson Crowder used to have. And they just have too many good pass catchers to go around. It may be conventional wisdom that Corey Davis is the big loser here, but I don't know, because, again, Wilson is another one of these smaller, new type receivers, 6 foot, 183 pounds. Elijah Moore is small. They may need to keep Davis on the field just to have some size, especially from a run blocking perspective. But I don't know, Mike. Someone's a loser in this field here. Is it Davis, or is it maybe Berrios, or what?
There's a chance that all the boats go up a little bit because the offense in general improves and Zach Wilson improves. And that's probably what you're hoping for. But I think Berrios and Moore are going to be competing for slot type roles, that they're going to be in those 3rd, 4th receiver roles. I think, like you said, Davis is going to be on the field because of his size, run blocking, big target, boundary target, end zone target. And I leave it to you what that means for fantasy, but it's probably a situation where everyone leeches off of each other. And that's one of the reasons why rookie wide receivers in fantasy tend to be not your best option, because they wind up, he's off the field because he doesn't know this play. He doesn't know this system. He doesn't run block well enough. We need Berrios and Davis out there, and suddenly Garrett Wilson's getting fewer targets.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's easy to get carried away because we've had Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase the last 2 years just be out of this world immediately. But like our projection for Garrett Wilson is 90 targets this season. He was the 53rd wide receiver in our fantasy rankings right now. So it's like, it's not like the immediate impact that you might expect of a top 10 type of receiving talent in the NFL draft. But that's by and large, that's really the way that it tends to go, even in today's game for rookie receivers, where
I think some of it is like
year 2 or 3.
There's a good chance that one of these rookie receivers is going to hit that 1,000 yards. But which one?
Which one? There's 6 of them that went off in the first 20 picks.
Fantasy team, so
it's true.
None of them are really favored to do it. Would Olave and Wilson be perceived differently if they weren't coming out of the same program?
Yes, because they wouldn't have Stroud throwing him the ball.
Well, that's true.
Yeah, I mean, they looked. I mean, they are phenomenal receivers who got to look extra phenomenal because they have a quarterback who's probably going to be a 1 or 2 quarterback next year, who already looks better than a quarterback in his class throwing them the ball. And all of that is a halo effect. But, it's one of those things where it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Yeah, they look great coming out of Notre Dame. Well, they went to Notre Dame because they were 5-star recruits, and they're going to come out of Notre Dame potentially more NFL ready, more ready to get their opportunities because, they were in a system where they're playing at a high level against high-level opponents. So
we're Ohio State in this case,
but,
obviously.
So, like, my mind immediately goes to that LSU team that had Odell Beckham and Jarvis Landry on it. And, like, I think they both really overachieved on expectations coming out of there because there really weren't enough targets to go around. But to me, this is a bit of a different situation because they did both get drafted so highly that I think the expectations are already really high. And it's kind of hard to imagine that they couldn't show their full potential there.
Do you remember their quarterback for Beckham and Landry?
Zach Mettenberger, wasn't it?
Mettenberger, the Titans legend, Mettenberger. Yes, love it.
That's correct, gentlemen.
We'll get to Christian Watson in a second. A couple of people have asked about Christian Watson, but first we've got Kenneth Walker with Seattle. Someone was criticizing you today, saying Chris Carson is not a veteran dropper because of the draft. He's a veteran dropper because of his neck. But I think what it is the draft told us what Seattle thinks about his neck.
Yeah.
We didn't know what Seattle thought about his neck injury. Now we know they don't think he's playing.
There's definitely uneven information publicly versus with the team. And I think not only did they draft a running back, but they drafted a running back who kind of has Carson's game, where it's like, it's pretty easy to suggest that, even if Carson comes back and is healthy, is he going to be with the team next year? They've got Rashad Penny, and it's hard to imagine that the team is going to make room for those three backs with Carson still getting paid a pretty decent amount of money. But even assuming Carson isn't in the mix here, it's hard to imagine that this is a great landing spot for Walker this year. Beyond the fact that they don't have Russell Wilson anymore, it just looks like this could be a competitive backfield. Rashad Penny, who the team brought back on a kind of a modest deal, but was still really, really good last year. His 27.3% rushing DVOA was second best among regular running backs, and is just a huge breakaway threat with great speed. He had 6.3 yards per attempt last year, but even before that, 5.1 in his career. So it's really all about the injuries, and he's had a ton of them in his career. I think we can understand that. But if you have a little bit of optimism about his health, it's hard not to see this as sort of a Broncos situation last year where Penny might be the Melvin Gordon type, and then the rookie Walker really more the Javonte Williams type. Yeah. And while those guys had 203 and 180 carries last year in the 16 games they played together, that's like I have Walker as the 38th running back in the fantasy draft this year. It's not somebody that you're going to get excited about in year one, again, with that huge type of bell cow workload.
What about the quarterback situation in Seattle? How does that impact all this?
Well, you really can't imagine it's going to lead to a lot of extra pass attempts with the kind of Matt Ryan angle of this. Right. You assume they're not going to be a super efficient offense, and then even if they are a little bit more efficient than we expect, Pete Carroll loves to run the ball. So I don't know. I just don't think they're going to be generating a lot of opportunities to score in the red zone, and so it could be some empty fantasy calories for Walker if he's not getting a lot of touchdowns and not catching a lot of passes. Just a 4.7% college receiving ratio. Some guys like Jonathan Taylor end up catching a lot more in the pros, but it's not to me a super promising sign of a 3-down workload.
Yeah.
CCX3 says Isaiah Spiller feels like a sneaky great PPR guy. Now I'm trying to remember where Isaiah
the Chargers
got drafted.
Ooh.
Yeah, I mean, it would take.
He's an Austin Eckler gets hurt super sneaky guy this year for sure. He's one of the guys that really dropped a lot further than we expected. He was 5th in backcast. I think a lot of scouts thought he might go in the 2nd or early 3rd round, slipped until later. I think long-term, it's probably a really promising landing spot, or could be one if Eckler can't kind of last through the full season healthy this year. Obviously, you've got a great offense, a great quarterback that can kind of generate him some opportunities. But in the short term, so many of these 3rd and 4th round guys are blocked by a really good running back. And so you're playing the injury game a little bit there, except with the Texans.
Yeah. Spiller strikes me as the kind of guy who helps the Chargers a lot. And then on your fantasy team, it's like, oh, he went 6 carries for 24 yards and a touchdown the week I didn't have him out there, and then none the next week. And, you're kind of stuck with that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think Eckler is their guy. If he's healthy, he's their guy. And CCX3 believes he's going to have a lower workload. I'm not sure why we would believe he's going to have a lower workload.
He's a smaller back.
But I mean, yeah, but he's the same size that he was the last 2 years.
I think Eckler is also one of the backs that seems small if you just look at his weight, but by being short, actually is a little bit more stout than you would expect. So like from a BMI perspective, I think he is big enough to have 200 plus touches as he survived last season.
Let's talk about Christian Watson. As Patrick Seeley says, he thinks Christian Watson is the receiver who's going to hit the 1,000-yard mark. But why does Christian Watson not make it into the top 5, actually top 6 of the rookie fantasy projections? He's actually number 7.
He is. And I think it's really easy to draw a line from, hey, Devontae Adams is gone. They needed a new wide receiver. They drafted Watson, traded up to get him early in the 2nd. This is going to be the guy. But I think there are some reasons to be pessimistic. One is from a scouting perspective, he's much more of a Marquez Valdez-Scantling type of player than he is a Devontae Adams type of player. Adams is 6'1", 215, so bigger, slower at 4.56 40. Watson is 6'4", tall, but 208, a little bit leaner, ran a 4.36 40, super fast, pretty similar measurables to Valdes-Scantling, who ran a 4.37 40. So from my perspective, he may be a little bit more of a field stretcher, and he is not experienced. Like Watson caught 43 balls in 12 games last year and did that at North Dakota State, which, while that is sort of the pro style offense that is kind of out there in the D2 level, is not Division I college football. So like this is a step up, and it's asking a lot for this guy to come in and just get a Davante Adams type of workload, right? By the by, Adams caught 38 and 50 balls his first 2 years in the NFL, didn't crack 500 yards. Again, Jamar Chase is the exception here. It strikes me as it's going to be pretty unlikely that Watson comes in and hits 1,000 yards.
Agreed.
Yeah, I agree. He sort of plays the MVS role more than he plays the Davante Adams role. And even Davante Adams, like you said, was not Davante Adams in his first couple of years.
Yep.
And speaking of MVS, he's now going to compete with Sky Moore with the Kansas City Chiefs, who Sky Moore is our next guy. What are your thoughts on Sky Moore? And then we'll get to Velus Jones.
Yeah, I think Sky Moore, from a fantasy perspective, obviously it's hard to land in a better spot than having Patrick Mahomes as your quarterback. It's also kind of easy to connect the dots between Tyreek Hill and him. He's 5'10" and 195, ran a 4.41 40. So that's like the speed slot type of guy, not just your traditional Braxton Berrios type of quick twitch slot guy. So you're like, you can kind of see the developmental angle with this. But it's another situation where it's easy to be a little bit too optimistic. Another guy, Tyreek Hill, had just 61 catches as a rookie, less than 600 receiving yards. It's really hard for these guys to make an immediate impact. And even though Moore has a little bit of a different build and skill set, to me, there is some overlap there with Juju Smith-Schuster in there on the short-term contract. Both probably do their best work from the slot. So this may be a situation where there's a bit of a rotation, maybe not somebody like Hill getting just tons and tons of targets. It's a little bit more distributed. So we're looking at closer to 60 targets this season, where he's, a top 70 fantasy receiver, a top 10 fantasy rookie, but not necessarily a guy that's going to win you your fantasy leagues.
And you also have Travis Kelce probably defaulting to being sort of target one in terms of target share potentially there. And yeah, there's a lot of balls to go on. Valdes-Scantling is there as a potential seam stretcher. And in terms of your jet sweeps and all of that, those goodies, Mecole is still there as like the gadget guy who's probably going to take over some of the lid lifting. It's tricky to find any one of those guys and say, oh yeah, this is going to be the next Tyreek. I think that's silly.
Yeah, I mean, they're all interesting players to bet on from a fantasy perspective because one injury could elevate multiple of these guys. But at least to start the season, this seems like it may be a lot more distributed than what the Kansas City Chiefs offense was in previous seasons.
Yeah, Bill Houston says Chiefs fans need to pump the brakes on the Sky expectations and see him more as the median between Mecole Hardman and Tyreek.
Okay.
What about Velus Jones? Now, Velus, of course, is 137 years old. He's the oldest rookie in NFL history.
Poor Velus.
I can't believe the Patriots didn't get him, actually. That would have been way more on brand.
What is he, 25? Yeah.
Also a huge special teams contributor. Belichick would have loved – if he had played college lacrosse, can you imagine what draft pick he would have spent on? Oh, my gosh.
He's Velum Jones. He's like an ancient manuscript written on like cow's stomach. That's how old he is.
I lean on you here, Mike, because I saw Jones really as more of a returner in the short term, but the Bears have such a big need at wide receiver. If Justin Fields is going to have any chance, like, is Jones going to be able to kind of come in and do more work offensively than he really did in college?
He had a pretty significant role for Tennessee at the end of his career. So he was doing things as sort of a boundary vertical guy. I saw him at the Senior Bowl. I thought he was okay. I thought he was fine. He didn't stand out particularly among that pack compared to guys like Christian Watson, kind of as a speed guy, boundary guy, etc. He's not ready to step in and be wide receiver one or wide receiver two if Mooney is wide receiver one. So the best thing I say is from a fantasy standpoint, he's going to get targets. He's going to get opportunities because there ain't nobody else. But is that a good plan to say, well,
no, I feel like even if he's wide receiver two in one of the worst offenses in the league is not going to get you a lot.
Right.
There are a lot of fantasy receivers that I think are better bets as a sleeper this year. In fact, like guys like George Pickens didn't even crack the top 12 among my fantasy rookies. So I don't think Jones is on my shallow draft list for a one season league. maybe is a little bit more intriguing from a dynasty perspective, although you would, again, feel better if he wasn't already 25.
Now, you and I talked about Jameson Williams and John Metchie and trying to figure out when they're coming back. Now, Mike Clay from ESPN is projecting full years for Williams and Metchie. We were a little bit more conservative with Williams and Metchie. I definitely feel like for Detroit in particular, although Metchie is, remind me where Metchie went?
The Texans.
Okay, so both of them are in basically the same spot, although I think Houston has less self awareness.
They don't know themselves as well.
Awareness of where they are.
A little delusion in there.
But do you really need to win in the first 6 weeks to rush Jameson Williams back, or is it better for the long term of your team if you PUP him and make sure he's fully healthy before you bring him back?
Yeah. So as a spoiler, we are projecting both of them to return in that week 7 to week 10 window, where if he lands on a PUP list, it would be after that finishes. And to me, that makes a lot of sense. As mentioned, there's definitely no incentive from a team perspective to make it an aggressive play in the least. But that said, I do understand Mike's perspective that these guys could be ready. So Williams tore his ACL in the college football championship. That was on January the 10th. Metchie tore his ACL in the SEC championship back on December 4th. And while I still have a hard time adjusting to where, in my mind, an ACL tear is a full year injury, I think with medical advancements over the last decade, that kind of isn't true anymore. So Adrian Peterson broke that mold really close to 10 years ago when he came back after 8 months from an ACL tear. But Amari Rodgers, when he tore his ACL in Clemson, was back on the field playing in 6 months. I think it's fair to say that this is maybe more of a 7 to 9 month injury these days. And if you kind of connect the dots in that perspective, 8 months from Williams' injury would put him at September 10th. That is Sunday of week 1 is September 11th. So it is right there at the start of the season.
Yeah, it definitely sounds then like there's more likely that Metchie is back for the start of the season, because that 1 month makes a huge difference.
It does, but also whether or not you're willing to believe the player on this, Williams told reporters on March the 30th, told James Palmer of the NFL Network, that he was ahead of schedule and expected to be physically cleared for training camp. And to me, that's kind of a big deal, because even if these guys were fully healthy by the literal start of the season, have they gone through all of the off-season training work, which is going to these guys are rookies. Do they know what to do? I don't know if we're quite there yet, but if they can actually be ready in more 6 or 7 months, to me, that actually would be a huge difference. And maybe they could be ready for week 1. But I still think that it's from where we are in the calendar. I think it's fair to be a bit pessimistic for both players making a very immediate impact this season. Could happen, but also could be more of a mid-season type of deal.
Right. Obviously, Williams is huge for dynasty leagues.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think
if you assume, first of all, you know how good he is. And once he comes back healthy, and if you assume that there's a very good chance that Detroit goes out and gets a quarterback at the top of next year's draft, Williams just huge dynasty value.
Also, he's very complimentary in terms of skills with Amon-Ra St. Brown, who's really not a slot-only guy, I wouldn't say, but with Williams on the outside as a speed guy, really makes sense in the slot. And it feels like that could be a very exciting offense in a couple of years with my man Dan Campbell at the helm.
Let's talk about when the quarterbacks are going to play. What is your feeling about, again, this is all guesswork here, but we talked a little bit about our guesses as far as the quarterbacks and what's the likelihood of them starting the season or, coming in the middle of the season.
So I'll lean on Mike a bit here from the actual quarterback prospect perspective. I'm a little less versed there, but I kind of looked at this from 2 perspectives from the teams, which is how desperate are they to win and how decent of a stopgap do they have? So Pickett obviously got drafted well ahead of these other guys. So you're seems like he's probably the guy that is the quickest to the field, but I would say the Steelers are not that desperate because they have a pretty decent stopgap in Mitchell Trubisky and might be competitive with him anyway.
Right.
So I was thinking maybe this is maybe more of a week 7 or maybe even later or not even this season if they're having early success with Trubisky and are tracking toward the playoffs. From my perspective, even though he was a later pick, Desmond Ridder may have a chance to start a little bit earlier because while the Falcons are in no way desperate to win, I think probably want to lose so they can get a good draft pick next season. Why not throw Ridder out there if he's ready to go a little bit and just evaluate him, kind of in the same way the Texans did with Davis Mills last year, where as long as he's not going to be under total duress and just having a Justin Fields type of situation where it's a catastrophe, might as well evaluate the guy because I think it's fair to say Marcus Mariota is probably not the long-term future for the Falcons at quarterback, right, Mike?
Right, and Mariota's going to get injured in the preseason. That's just how life goes. And then Ritter will be after. I think Ritter is probably the most actual ready to take the field, including Kenny Pickett, of all of them.
Yeah, so Willis, I think we all expect is probably getting a redshirt year. We're projecting him for a maybe week 18, kind of like Mahomes in his rookie year. Like, hey, there's nothing to play for the Titans. Let's throw the kid out there, see what happens. So, Mike, to me, Matt Corral is the one that's the most interesting. We're currently projecting a between week 10 and then a not this season type of entry here, where the Panthers are the most desperate of these teams to win, because I think Matt Rule has to expect he's going to get fired if he doesn't make the playoffs this year. But they also have probably the worst stopgap solution in Sam Darnold, who had the second worst passing DVOA last season. So it's like you're balancing, hey, like we got to find a quarterback. If Darnold's not that guy, do we just Hail Mary and throw Matt Corral in there and hope something good happens, because we're going to get fired if we don't?
Corral could conceivably pepper pot and energy and enthusiasm his way past Darnold in the preseason. He could create a groundswell with that, get into that lineup and distribute a bunch of little short passes, to DJ Moore. And if
Christian McCaffrey, just throw 40 at him and then hope he lives through it.
Dink, dunk, and scramble and make it kind of fun and interesting. That is a scenario that happens. I don't think it's a long-term solution, and I don't think it's sustainable, but it might make more sense than putting Sam Darnold out there. So I could see him seeing the field, and I could see him when we start doing DFS and stacks, and like him getting in there and having a low value on a stack, and like, oh, he gives you scrambling yards too. And what about the screen pass to Chuba Hubbard for the touchdown? Let's do this. I could see him having value like that. I could also see, by the way, Caleb Ellaby having that value, undrafted for the Seahawks, coming in some point early in the season and taking a job from Drew Lock.
Bill Houston, if Matt Rule does get fired before week 8, that's even more reason for Corral to get out there and play some games from an evaluation standpoint. Again, like Ritter, like Davis Mills last year, might as well trot your rookie out, see what he has, because these teams are probably looking at the better quarterback options in next year's class, want to make a quick decision.
Caleb Ellaby, huh?
Caleb Ellaby.
I think we should should we be adding Caleb Ellaby to the going deep section?
Put him to the going deep section. He's third string behind Geno Smith and Drew Lock. He was Sky Moore's quarterback. He's like a low budget version of Matt Corral. He doesn't run as well, but he's like a RPO machine. And Joey Sucks, do not call him Riddler, because every time you call him Riddler, I will be picturing Desmond Ridder as Frank Gorshin. That's how far back I go. And the Falcons will put him on the field with a little question mark instead of a number.
Yes, the danger with Ritter is that a desperate organization might take him playing as the 20th best quarterback as a positive sign for future growth and not as his cap. This has been a text from the future of the Houston Texans. Right? I mean, isn't that kind of the feeling about Davis Mills? He got better in the second half of last year. How good can Davis Mills really be, though, right?
Right. Riddle me this, Jack Easterby.
Well,
When is a quarterback of the future not a quarterback of the future?
One sort of counterpoint is that we are all, teams included, a lot worse at projecting quarterbacks than we would want to be. So it's not that insane that a day 3 quarterback ends up going on to have some NFL success. So it's not the worst idea if you're not going anywhere in the short term to like see if it happens, especially if it's going to lose you games to get you a better draft pick next year.
All right, let's hit quickly. We've got a little graphic of the veterans who lost the most value according to this draft. Guys to get off your keeper teams. Now, I don't know if people cut people from their keeper teams in the offseason, but, guys to not keep.
Yeah.
Davis Mills DVOA, by the way, Ben Robinson asks, was like -8%. It really wasn't that bad.
He was the second best rookie quarterback in DVOA behind just Mac Jones. So pretty shocking, but yeah, promising. Ish.
So yeah, Chris Carson, this told us what Seattle believes about his neck. They believe he's not playing. He's not going to be healthy.
That one's pretty obvious. Honestly, a lot of these, you can just kind of connect the dot from the rookie that got drafted to the player whose job he's taking. Although I guess in the Eagles case, it's not the rookie they drafted, it's the A.J. Brown they traded for. Which is that's pretty tough. When you're the second wide receiver for the Eagles in Quez Watkins, you're like, yeah, I'm going to have a little bit of a role, even if we bring in a rookie. Nope, we brought in A.J. Brown, maybe the best wide receiver in the NFL. So he drops from 75 basically projected fantasy points to like he's probably going to be a Kenny Stills type of like occasional home run hitting threat, but it's hard to imagine him getting even close to the 60 some targets he had last season for the team. That's tough for his fantasy value.
Right.
Yeah. Ke'Shawn Vaughn is an interesting one because he was a third rounder and he's been around for a couple years. And Rachaad White is also a third rounder. But at the same time, it's like if the Bucs really felt like he was doing anything exciting in practice, wouldn't they have given him more time in the first couple of years? So even though those guys have the same draft
pedigree
capital spent on them, it feels like Vaughn's going to take a backseat to Rachaad White.
It's a guess, but that's the angle that I took here too. So Vaughn has only taken 26 and 36 carries his first 2 NFL seasons, and it's looked good from like a traditional efficiency perspective, 4.7 yards per carry. But I think Vaughn has had unusually easy difficulty carries, both in the fact that Tom Brady was his quarterback and teams are a little bit more scared of him. And also too, it's 50% rushing success rate is pretty average. I think a lot of his carries came on like 3rd and long situations where you can bang out your 6-yard runs and it doesn't really move the needle in any way. So I think that's a little bit overstating how good he is. From the Rachaad White angle, that's the 3rd round rookie for this year. He was 2nd in backcast. Yeah. So I think there's a lot of reasons to be optimistic for him. And while that may have been true for Vaughn a couple of years ago, the fact that we haven't seen anything so far, I think is discouraging for his future value.
Michael Carter is the one guy who I think people might have considered keeping in a keeper league, who now you can't keep at all.
Well, yeah, in a dynasty league, you probably still can, but from a keeper league perspective, it's tough. And I hate this again. Both North Carolina alums hate to see this for Carter, especially because, again, another guy where the fact that he's 201 pounds understates the size because he's 5'8". So the BMI perspective, he's a little bulkier than that. But it's hard to see the Breece Hall pick as anything other than an indication this team wants to go with, at best, like a full committee, but more likely, like again, Breece Hall is the primary back and Carter's the change of pace back. Yeah. And Carter was like super dangerous in a limited workload last year. Again, he led running backs in broken tackle rate, but he is such a good pass catcher, is like more of the shifty side of things, where you see Hall is really maybe more of the between the tackles tackle breaker. And it's a great problem for the Jets to have, but from a fantasy perspective, it's not good for Carter's fantasy value. He's down to 44th in our running back rankings, even in PPR formats.
And Zack Moss is the other one. The Bills did eventually take a running back, right? Everyone wanted to mock a running back to the Bills. They did eventually take one, not one who's going to take Devin Singletary's job, but James Cook is absolutely going to take Zack Moss's job.
Yeah, I mean, I think we saw this with Moss coming because he got a healthy and active a couple times down the stretch last year. And while Sean McDermott is like, it's just a numbers game, I think it was pretty easy to see. Like, he was really bad in yards per carry. He had the 2nd lowest average yards before contact. Kind of a weird one. I don't think that was entirely blocking related. I think some of that was like vision and decision making. Yeah. But I think some fantasy players may fall into a bit of a trap here, thinking that Cook is going to come and take Singletary's job. I don't totally think that's the case, because Cook is, unlike Dalvin, dramatically smaller, like a below 28 BMI type of player. To me, he is, how the team tried to sign JD McKissick in the offseason. To me, he is sort of the McKissick guy. Yeah. So the Bills offense may look a little bit different with a little bit more kind of third down check downs to the running back, try to keep Josh Allen a little bit healthier this season. Right. But I think Cook is going to probably have fewer than 100 carries. So it's bad news for Zack Moss, but I think Singletary remains a top 25 type of running back.
All right. The other thing we wanted to talk about today before we sign off from today's show is the Cleveland Browns and the exciting news about Mike's Cleveland Browns duck. The exciting news about Cleveland's controversial 4-year plan. Bonuses for Hugh Jackson, the story that came out this year. There was a bonus for Cleveland getting at least 11 picks in the 2016 draft. A bonus if 5 of those picks were in the 3rd round, the first 3 rounds. A bonus if the team ranked in the bottom quarter of cash spend in 2016. And a bonus if the Browns carried over at least 15% of league cap from 2016 to 2017. Now, it's interesting because these bonuses do jive with sort of what we think of as tanking, right? Yeah. The 2016 and 2017 was about building for the future. And then in 2018, one of the incentives in the contract was for winning 10 games. Right. So there were no incentives for how many games you won in the first 2 years. And then in the 3rd year, all of a sudden, there were incentives for winning games. So there's two questions I have about this from Hugh's perspective. First of all, it's hard for Hugh to argue that this is the reason he was fired, is that he didn't follow this. Because if 2018 was the reason the season they were supposed to actually win, and then they started 2-5-1, that's when he got fired.
Right.
The other is, I don't quite understand why Hugh Jackson was supposed to get bonuses based on things like cap carryover and how many draft picks they got by trading down in the draft. Like, Hugh Jackson doesn't have any control over that.
Right. And the first thing was, well, they have to lose to get all those high picks. It's like they have to make trades to get all of those high picks. So like losing is a contributor to that. But if you want more than one, no one can lose hard enough to get 2 first-round picks. That's trading. So I don't know if this is, well, these were the bonuses that were spread across the football operations department, that Hugh, along with Sashi, along with other people, were going to share these bonuses if they accomplish these things, or if Hugh and misrepresented a little bit what some of these things were. But you're right, that doesn't logically add up. The other thing I would say about this is, for year one, for the very first year, I guess 2016, I don't hate most of this. And I'm usually the skeptic of the group of the...
Right. You're the guy who's usually anti-tanking. In particular, you're anti the idea of analytics equals tanking.
Yes. I think analytics, one thing, tanking is nonsense. It's like a weird, side thing that comes up. But analytics means rebuilding, but not necessarily rebuilding in a way that says, well, let's just lose some games. Everything I heard there, none of it, like I said, says lose games specifically, but it talks about real benchmarks for rebuilding your roster, like getting those extra picks, carrying over in the first year cap space instead of just throwing it at, the honey badger or something like that because you feel like it. I like most of those. I think those are good decisions. My question will always be, in year two, I don't want to hear about cap carryover, and I don't want to hear about those things. If we're still not focused on winning, I would like to hear things like, we had 2 guys voted to the Pro Bowl, you get a bonus. Or so many guys under the age of 25 did X, Y, and Z, and you get a bonus, and things like that, so that they're being rewarded for the development of the players that are on the roster. That's something we didn't see with what they put in paper there.
So my attempt at the devil's advocate here is, like, I guess it's a little bit timing related, but it was pretty transparent that the Browns were kind of doing this rebuild at the time, right? So, like, I would say that if winning is your goal as a coach to sort of safeguard your career, maybe the Browns needed to add some incentives to hire a coach, to attract a coach, to be like, yeah, we're probably going to lose in the short term, but like if we win, that's great. Your career's going great. It's going to lead to success. But if we lose, hey, here are some like kickers to make it a little bit friendlier for you. So like, sorry, we gave you this kind of bad deal in the short term. And here's some financial offset for it. So like, it's a little bit of a chicken and egg situation. Like, are they encouraging Jackson to lose? Or are they saying that, hey, you may lose, but we'll give you a little bit more because this is actually kind of a raw deal in the short term and we'll try to win later?
Right. I will point out that, they didn't fire Hugh after the 0-16.
Right.
They fired him in the year when they were supposed to, okay, this is the year we were targeting. This is the year we're going to compete. Yeah. He started 2-5-1. And then they were like, okay, you're gone.
Right. And again, like you said, everyone knew that this was going to be both a rebuild in a traditional sense and a Moneyball analytics flavored rebuild.
Like closer to what teams do in other sports, like the Philadelphia 76ers or the Houston Astros.
Right. So, and again, I was a big skeptic of in 4 years, please stop talking to me about what's going to happen in 4 years, because all of your rookies should be looking for new contracts in 4 years if they succeeded. You can't just like wait out 4 years and see what happens. But for that first year, Hugh should have known all this, been on board with all this from the time that he said yes to Haslam and whoever else and signed that contract.
Yeah. So do you think this, the sort of controversy over this is going to keep teams from making deals like this in the future?
I don't know.
Or do you think it's going to sort of be forgotten?
I mean, so much of this just sounds like and again, the issues of racism in the NFL are multitude, and there's all sorts of things. This sounds more like a Hugh Jackson thing. And I guess I'm worried that like the things that we were applauding the Browns for, and by we, I mean all of us, and yes, like 5 years ago, are now being offered as evidence of something else. And that's the part that feels very weird and very strange. And it's like, no, we're trying to put a scientific measure on how a rebuilding goes, and that's what that was. So I don't think anybody's going to put this in writing anymore.
No, that I mean, you can't. It's hard to promise it without putting it in writing.
It like in a perfect world, the NFL would take away the incentive to be bad, and so like, if you, I don't know how you do it. Like other sports have tried, and we haven't really come up with anything. If we want to keep the draft, which now gets like Super Bowl viewership and has hundreds of thousands of people in attendance in Vegas, I don't really know how you get rid of that. And so teams are going to be encouraged to lose games to try to get the best quarterback
I just
prospects.
want to point out, all those people went to Vegas to watch announcements.
And teams, no, but teams are not incentivized to lose games. I mean, in the most general level, this is the great incentive package. You go 1-31, you get fired, and then it turns into a hassle after for years to come afterwards. There's not a really good example of this is the incentive, and look what you got out of it.
Yeah, I really feel like teams are only incentivized to lose games for 1 year. Because that quarterback is so important, and you want to get that quarterback at the top of the draft. After that, you want your quarterback to learn how to win.
For 1 year,
Jacksonville did not want a second straight year of the number one pick. They were good with 1 year of the number one pick.
Yeah, for 1 year in the year that the quarterback is there, and kind of when you reach December something and you're down there.
Yeah,
right. Because it's like that's kind of what the I don't want to talk about. The Dolphins might be a totally different situation. But we stink now. It's December, and it looks like that guy's there, and maybe we should ease up on the brakes. But that's similar to what you said, Scott. Like it's week 18. Let's give the rookie a start. It's a different thing. It's like we're incentivized to lose.
I just disagree, Mike, because we should revisit this next offseason after the Panthers win 7 games, because they'll probably have a little bit more success early trying to win. They'll fire Rule. They'll start Corral and start losing, but they're going to be too far ahead of teams like the Falcons and Seahawks and aren't going to get CJ Stroud next year, right? They're going to have to settle for a second-tier guy. And yes, we all are bad at evaluating quarterbacks, and maybe they'll get Justin Herbert, and it'll be great. Right. But I think they would rather have their choice of all the quarterbacks if they could.
Or maybe they'll get Baker Mayfield, which was the grand prize of this. And I saw you guys in the message board, successful, because now 6 years later, the Browns look like they might be good after they hired this guy to be quarterback.
No need to get into that. Yeah,
it is true. The grand prize of the tanking was Baker Mayfield.
Well, the grand prize was the ability to choose your own quarterback. Right. And I'm not saying that they did a bad job taking Baker. I think we would have encouraged them to take Baker, but they had the chance to take Josh Allen too, and it just didn't work out. It's hard. It's super hard, but you want to have the option to get the quarterback you want to get.
Yeah. Patrick Seeley says this is the Patriots 2020 model. Try to win with Cam Newton and no roster, and then get baby goat Mac Jones. I think he's more of a baby llama.
Like a Dalai Lama. Yeah.
I don't think he's any kind of baby goat.
Right. And of course the Patriots are 100% satisfied with
let Mac Jones be his own person, I think.
Yeah, which is why you draft Bailey Zappe, because you're 100% on board.
I think they took Bailey Zappe in the 4th round. I mean, I don't know what they were doing, but it wasn't to replace Mac Jones.
No, I mean, it was
4th round. You don't take a quarterback in the 4th round because you want to replace your starter.
You don't take one in the 4th round when you're completely satisfied with your starter either. But all right,
they did that with Brady all the time now. So clearly,
right.
Rohan
he was 35.
And Kevin O'Connell and Cliff Kingsbury and Matt Castle and Bradley Zappe and Jarrett Stidham. And they do this every couple years. They take one of these mid-round quarterbacks just because.
Everything's going to be just fine, Patriots fans. Everything's going to be just fine.
There's a lot of reasons to believe that things are not going to be just fine. On the list of reasons to think that things are not going to be just fine, drafting Bailey Zappe is reason 347.
And I will agree with you. It's at least reason 3 in this draft class. So
it's not even close to one of the biggest important, losing J.C. Jackson and why did we give Jonnu Smith so much money and Nelson Aguilar not really a number 1 receiver and Cole Strange was drafted 2 rounds too early. I mean, and all the cornerbacks they drafted were 5'9". I mean, there's Bailey Zappe is way down on the list.
The level of cognitive dissonance here is staggering. And Patrick Seeley says, haha, we got a Pro Bowl quarterback. Patrick, you're the one who put Pro Bowl in quotation marks, not me. I think your fingers were speaking to you.
I don't think there's any cognitive distance. I think Bailey Zappe replaces Jarrett Stidham. He doesn't replace Mac Jones. I don't know why they took him. I wouldn't have drafted him.
Right.
I would have banged the table for EJ Perry, and I would have done it in the 6th round, not the 4th. But still, I feel like, Bailey Zappe has absolutely no mobility whatsoever. Like, he works great if you're never going to ever let the other team rush the passer for any reason. But seriously, there are plenty of reasons to believe that the Patriots messed up this offseason or this draft or this offseason and this draft. And drafting Bailey Zappe is really not one. There's way more important things that they screwed up. Like the Cole Strange thing is way more important.
Drinking soda.
Way more important.
Drinking tea.
All right. That does it for the show, folks. Thank you to Scott, and congratulations again. Have a great weekend. Have a great next 2 weeks on honeymoon.
Thank you. Excited to.
Thank you to Mike. Mike and I will be back next Thursday to argue more about pointless 4th-round, 3rd-string quarterbacks, because that's what you all want to hear. You all want to hear us argue about 3rd-string quarterbacks, because that's where the real money is made in this business. We're not going to argue about letting your number 1 corner go to a conference rival. We're going to argue about replacing your 3rd-string quarterback, because that's how you know that a team is really missing things.
Getting 6 more running backs to add to the list when Devontae Parker's your number 1.
That's another thing that goes on the list of things that are more important than Bailey Zappe. That's correct. Yeah.
There may not be a show next week if y'all get called up to first take, by the way.
Bailey Zappe, drafting another 2 running backs.
We're trying something new, Scott, arguing on the talk show. No one's ever tried this in the history of sports talk. We'll try it and see if it works.
Just try to come up with a Cowboys argument for next week to get the viewership up.
Oh, all right. How about the Cowboys are still going to be pretty good this year?
Yeah. Why don't you go? Are the Eagles the new number 1 NFC East team next week? There you go.
Here in Philly.
Here's a hint from the projections, folks. The Eagles and Cowboys are going to be pretty good this year, and they have very easy schedules.
And Carson Wentz twice a year for both of them.
And each get Carson Wentz twice a year. All right, guys, that's the show. We'll be back next Thursday. Tomorrow's Splash Play at 2:30, so check that out. And we will see you guys next Thursday.